All right, welcome everyone to the Twin Cities LeSS meetup. My name is David Nielsen. I'm the facilitator today. We rotate, and today we have James Carpenter with us. He's going to be discussing and presenting on a LeSS adoption with a company. It's a software and a hardware company. And so that'll be really interesting for us to hear about, because typically we just deal with software, right? But so that'll be really cool. And then we'll have a Q&A session. I think the presentation you're thinking is going to be 30 to 45 minutes, right? And then we'll have a Q&A session. So what we're trying to do is get through the presentation as best as we can, and then we'll have a Q&A session. So put your questions in the chat. I will be monitoring that, kind of organizing that, prioritizing things. If there's a lot of people asking the same question, that'll come first. So it'll be really great for you to put your questions in there throughout. And then when we get to the Q&A, I'm going to start queuing it up for the guest speakers. Also, we have a mystery guest. So that's Mitya on the participant list there. And he's a development group manager that worked hand in hand with James to implement this LeSS adoption. So that'll be great, just to ask questions of both people and hear from both people. And, again, we're here because we're all interested in learning about large scale Scrum implementations, what went well, and of course, what went wrong. We really want to hear those nitty gritty learning lessons, because usually those are more insightful than some of the success stories, although this has both, so it should be a really meaty, good presentation. So to introduce James, he's been a software engineer for over 15 years, leading agile transformation since 2012. He's been a leader in 2 LeSS adoptions. This presentation will be on the first of the 2. And this presentation is also the basis for his LeSS trainer candidate process. So James is going to be one of the newest certified LeSS trainers, and this will be part of that process. We know you will. You're going to get it. And so he's working with Craig Larman to publish that on the LeSS website. And he's also been on a variety of other coaching engagements. He's an independent executive consultant for Agile, and just brings a lot of great perspectives. So I will show where I'm supposed to show exactly where to find the reading materials. Go to the meetup. You're going to find a pre-read content right here. And you can click on that, and what it'll take you to is this. So you will have, you'll scroll down a bit, and then there's pre-read handout in online format and PDF format. It was recommended that you read it before joining today, but if you weren't able to join, you can ask clarifying questions. Nobody's gonna, beat you up over it. And if you open it up, it starts out with a timeline. It's got some introductory biography, and then we're going to pretty much get into the presentation. So I don't want to steal your thunder. If you can, keep your webcams on, try and engage. That's it. Thanks. So I'm going to turn it over to you.
Oh, okay.
James. Yeah, go ahead. Thank you.
So first off, I'll just say hi. Thank you for everyone coming, and especially for those who've done the pre-reading. I'm really looking forward to all the great questions. And I'll tell you a little bit more what I can about Mitya, which of course obviously isn't his real name, but he was at this client that this case study is about. This is not your normal director, very exceptionally high emotional intelligence, running a very significant group doing some very hardcore low-level work. He's worked at a variety of I know it's at least at one major startup now. Very hard-hitting hardware, software engineer, firmware engineer. I would say more great things, but I'm worried about revealing the client. So fantastic guy and one of my best friends. So I'm very fortunate to have had opportunity to get to know Mitya. Mitya, do you want to say anything else?
First of all, thanks for the amazing introduction, James. No, so happy to be here. Actually, excited to share what we went through in the transformation in the team, and with guidance of James, and with just happy to share what we went through and answer any questions and help any way I can.
Now I'm trying to find my notes that I lost.
Maybe while James is looking for his notes.
Yes.
You know, one thing I can say for sure is that you know, the team that I was leading at the time was operating pretty well, and with a certain status quo that's known in our field, and would have been doing the same thing. I think from what I know now, missing out on a lot of aspects that agile development provides if it wasn't for James coaching us through it and helping tremendously and introducing us to all of these concepts.
So we're going to go through this as David suggested. Mitya and I are going to do this together. We're going to try to cover the main figures pretty quickly so that we can get to the questions. So our intention here is to mostly cover the content quickly, not take a lot of questions. If there's any clarifying questions, that's fine, but mostly save your really meaty stuff for after, and please write them down, because the whole point is to get to those. That's where the real value is letting y'all ask the questions. But we just want to give you a little bit of overview first to kind of help to set the stage, which we think will take us about 25 minutes or so. All right, so context. So this is a hardware. Mitya, you want to explain this hardware product? You can do it better than I can.
Yeah, I can do it. It's a very nice diagram, so it's easy to explain based on this diagram. So maybe going from hardware to software. So on the left side in James' diagram, the motherboard.
Who uses this thing? Who are customer base? Who buys this thing? Yeah. What is it?
So the customers are data centers for this particular company, this particular product, mostly enterprise data centers, but really this type of product is used in cloud or enterprise setting, but data center product basically. And it's so the purpose of the product.
It's a data center on a forklift, right?
Yeah.
It's got your storage, it's got your compute, it's got your networking, it has the software to manage the whole mess. If you're not going to run on AWS and you needed to do this yourself, you would have to have a lot of infrastructure in order to support that. This lets you buy that off the shelf with a big check.
That's true. Yep, that's true. And this you know, this product is by now you know, quite mature, and it originated even before AWS had things like on-prem data centers. So this would satisfy many needs, including the one if you want to build kind of on-prem cloud. One of the big features of this product is the density. This blade concept is more dense. You're able to populate compute more densely than if you have you know, kind of what's called pizza boxes or various rack unit height servers that kind of slide into the racks in the data center. So the details, the blade motherboard is really the compute module. It has processors, it has memory, it has I/O in terms of so all the I/O is consolidated over network. So it's Ethernet. You see there as a NIC, but over Ethernet, it's also able to encapsulate other things like fiber channel and various storage protocols. So this is a compute module. And as you can see, the compute module, there are 8 compute modules in this chassis, pretty common in the industry. 6 to 8 is a common form factor. And encapsulated in a physical chassis. The chassis itself has a chassis controller that monitors the environmentals and reports to the managing software, which we'll get to in a moment, the details of each compute node, the details of all the compute nodes, the chassis details, and so on. One more thing I didn't mention is the node controller. Back to the left side of the diagram, the node controller is the a module that allows configurations to flow from the software to the BIOS on the motherboard, and static data to come out from the motherboard and go back. Static and dynamic, such as environmental and voltages and temperatures and things like that. Go back.
Mitya, I remember in the old days when I was at a seismic processing shop, you had to go around with a VT100 terminal and plug a serial cable into the back of a pizza box. And obviously these servers may be off in a cage, thousands of miles away, and you need the ability to administer them remotely. If you need to change BIOS settings, you need the ability to do that, right? So that's what that's about, right?
Right, and so this node controller will provide that as well, the kind of KVM piece, so that you can access. So it can be configured and worked with in 2 ways. One is kind of hands-free completely remotely, and hands-on completely remotely. So hands-free, maybe this is a good time to get to the GUI, MCS GUI and administration piece that's on the top right. So the main objective of this piece of software is really user interaction with all of the blades in the chassis and all of the chassis that are under the management of this software. And it has some high limit of number of chassis it can manage. And again, also this is the user's view into the health of every cell, in this cell being the blade, or every CPU within every blade, or every module of memory in every blade. Also, its objective is to provide compute configuration, networking configuration, storage configuration, which is then distributed to the relevant nodes, relevant blades, relevant chassis, and so on. And in return, it gives a view of the kind of accumulated view of all the hardware under its control.
Mitya, thank you. I think it might be useful if I give you, let me describe this from a slightly different perspective as well, because everything he said is super useful, relevant. It might be a little overwhelming for some. I think there's a few facets that are interesting here from a like a coaching transformational kind of experience. First off is all of this stuff at the higher level, this administrator GUI and all that is effectively middleware. It's the sort of thing that in another world might be written in Java, might be written in C++. You are running on stable hardware that is predictable. You might be running embedded Linux, you might be running some sort of, it may come across as a network device, but it's basically middleware. It just happens to be responsible for managing this big monstrosity, right? Now, as you go down into down and you get close to the hardware, there will be custom drivers for those network cards. There will be custom hardware in the blade. You get into very custom bespoke hardware. Much of the work Mitya's group was doing was BIOS code. This was, there is no operating system. There is no threading. The C libraries, the standard C libraries are only partially implemented. You're cross-compiled and deployed to target. So you have this broad span of when you get hardware. Sometimes the prototype hardware is flaky. Sometimes the flakiness is in the firmware. Sometimes the firmware can be adjusted to work around the flakiness, sometimes not. So there's this synthesis of custom funky hardware, custom funky software way down where the Morlocks live. But all this is also coupled with what at the high level is really a bunch of middleware code. And all of these things are kind of glued together in a very complex overall product with a few thousand engineers working on the thing. The other facet, which Mitya mentioned as well, is this is deployed on premise. So just like your cell phone, when a new version of iOS comes out, everyone doesn't get a new hardware, right? A lot of people keep your old phone and that new software runs on the old hardware. But some of the new features only work for the new in development generation of the hardware, that say they're back in Apple's labs. So the focus, the customer base is a much different customer base. The complexity of the product and the amount of money involved is much different. So here you're talking about huge checks from a small number of customers instead of, small checks from millions of customers, or tens of millions or hundreds of millions, how many people Apple sells to. So the hardware generations is an interesting dynamic that plays a part, and it's not as if it's a hosted situation where you're in control of the entire environment like you would be in a software as a service. Anything else before we move on, Mitya, that we think we should cover?
One thing maybe relevant specifically to this transformation experience is that some of the pieces of software and embedded software and as James described it correctly, middleware, they are their life cycle, their release cycle is independent of external world to a degree. So you invent a feature, or you perceive that the user needs a feature, you add a feature to the GUI. Nobody else kind of externally, the marketplace externally, not necessarily driving it. The one exception is the BIOS specifically, and it's really driven by, the cycle is driven by a number of things. One of them is Intel, in this case Intel, but Intel or AMD release schedule. So when the time that Intel or AMD announce a new CPU, all the server vendors, all the compute vendors say, we'd like to ride that wave of adoption. Also, we have a product also. So there are kind of multiple cycles in play here. One cycle is sort of a bug fix cycle where the released hardware, release software is being maintained and there are periodic releases, but there is also this big long cycle of many months, more than a year months, that is oftentimes is an opportunity to do a complete overhaul of software, of BIOS specifically. That's all I wanted to add.
Yes, and you can't, and if you miss those dates, you get the prototype chips, and they give you new generations of prototype chips that are always having less trouble than the previous ones. But if you miss the date, you miss gazillions of dollars per day for not having been ready when Intel put it on the shelf.
Yeah, and you missed also the kind of marketing dollars that are not yours, that are external, industry wave, right? Industry wave is important to ride and not be behind, and then catch up.
So thank you There's this timeline that talks about the engagement. You'll see that it's very helpful to keep this timeline separate. If you read the pre-read, I even suggested that you print it out and take notes on it, because as we go through the other figures, sometimes it helps you pull the context together, because you can see what happened here. And you can connect the other stuff to this timeline, and it really helps. So you might even put that in a separate window if you have the separate screen space for it, or even print out just this one. It can be useful to take notes on. So there was an initial diagnostic. So know that about the timeline, but I'll move on. So when let's move. Okay, there was an initial team that we stood up that was indeed an end-to-end feature team. This was a single Scrum team that was directly interacting with the people that were using the product. It happened to be a diagnostic capability that was being added. It would satisfy a very natural requirements area of the in less terms of the overall MCS product, the modular compute system product. We're not going to spend much time talking about it. You're more than welcome to ask questions on it later. But know that there was an initial team stood up. That initial team was very much a full vertical slice. We pulled people from different teams that had the skill set to work in every component that they needed to touch. And again, you know, it was a bunch of stuff in the middle, diagnostics, and then a little bit of functionality all over the place. And that team pulled together a cross-functional feature team that could do it. Here's some happy team members. Here was their definition of done. There's some interesting political nuances that show up that are in the caption here and talked about. If you did the pre-read, it might make for good questions later. And now we're down to, when we start talking about the work that we did with Mitya, we only did it we initially formed our teams just for the new in development hardware. If we were back to the iPhone analogy, this would be equivalent to saying, for all the iPhones that are in the field today, of all the different variations, the different generations of them, we're not going to focus on software for that. We're going to let that be whatever it is, and let the teams that are working on that code related to those older products, we're just going to leave them alone. But for development of the newest generation of iPhones that's in the lab, or in this case, the newest generation of hardware of this MCS product, we're going to start to build these LeSS-like structures for the BIOS team, which is where the interest was. And initially, that was very much just within this component. It was really a component team, which would make, we'll get to that. And then over time, we worked to continue to grow our way towards the surface, grow our way up to the user interface, and become a more natural requirement area, and to begin to slowly cross-train the team to be able to do small amounts of work in these other components, so that, for example, if you added a new attribute that you needed to be able to configure in BIOS, you would want this LeSS-like structure of teams to be able to even make the changes in the GUI layer and anything else in between that needed to be made. Now, we didn't completely get there, but we started to go in that direction. We didn't go as far as we would like to have gone, but certainly that was happening before some massive layoffs started to hit us. It's also interesting to know that when we first talked about BIOS, out of 30, 40 people, mostly like 1 or 2 people would know a particular file or a particular small micro bit of functionality. If you wanted to tune memory, only this one guy was mostly the guy who did all the memory tuning stuff. And if you wanted to do some other bit of work, it was only 1 or 2 people that knew how to do that. This idea of working more cross-functionally, even within BIOS, which is itself a big, massive thing, that was not the norm prior to the adoption. So to initially have gone, well, we're just going to work all the way up to the GUI from day one, is not something that there would have been the institutional will and there wouldn't have even been the probably the interest or maybe even the ability of the team to stretch that far, or the teams to stretch that far that soon. It was a stretch just to say, hey, as teams, we're going to take whatever comes up the top of the product backlog and we're going to work it, regardless of what aspect of BIOS we have to touch. Even that was a challenge to begin with. And as the teams matured, as they became more cross-functional, as we ran effective retrospectives, it became increasingly self-evident to them, well, we really should be making some of these other changes ourselves. And so a team that was kind of focused in the areas that went up to the GUI started to get agreement with some of the key tech leads and other aspects and other parts, other components, to make those changes themselves and just do some peer review. So they started to work in that direction, but we never got as far as we wanted. But understand that even within the BIOS, there was a lot of narrowness initially. Mitya, any comments there?
Yeah, actually, I was
watch our time, by the way. Keep
going. As quickly as I can. So this is very, very fundamental, I think, to the challenge of adapting in any form of agile in a BIOS space, is because this is simply how things are done. This is, BIOS is a very well-established industry, well-established software development practice, and specialization is not only common, but it's key in some aspects of BIOS development, or at least it's perceived to be key to successful BIOS development. And another very important thing that I probably should have mentioned at the beginning is that it is a conviction that you don't do agile in firmware. I'm not on video, but air quotes, knew that it's not done, and I knew because people who I respect, people who have been in the industry for a long time, told me that they know that it's not done. And really wasn't until James came to the organization, not specifically for the BIOS purposes, but for other components, and was coaching them. I don't know if, James, I should go through the story.
Sure,
here,
I think the fact that you okay. wanted it. I didn't force any of this on you.
Right. While you were forcing it on other people, no. No. I became interested in, interested in what was going on with other groups and what they were doing. But again, I was convinced and knew that it's not done in the BIOS and shouldn't be done in the BIOS. I had no basis in it, but I just knew because I was. And it was James kind of slowly arranged for. Through some social interaction with other managers, and finally in dropping into my office and kind of drawing things on the board that some of them didn't make sense and some of them made sense logically, even though I didn't understand any of the agile terminology. Finally, there was a meeting where it was supposed to be half an hour, and 2.5 hours later, I was convinced that there is really, nothing prescriptive against doing this kind of work in our environment. It's challenging, and we have to solve the challenges that are specific to our type of development and specific to the timelines and specific to dependencies. In the hardware software world, the dependencies are different than when it's kind of software only world. But the fundamentals of how how people are treated in this environment differently, and how estimates and deliverables and retrospectives and a lot of things that I always felt that it's hard for managers to implement without a particular framework, and this framework gave a lot of opportunities to just implement great work environment, I felt.
Thank you. Very helpful. Org chart. So when I came in, so I had a few phone calls. It was, with the sponsor, which is not Mitya, it was a different guy. And from the time that I had a yes to the time that I was in the door took a month, month and a half, something like that, all the paperwork done. Once I showed up, one of the early meetings I had for the first time in person is I finally got to meet this senior VP / general manager in person. And I sat in this person's office, and amazingly supportive, definitely an engineer's engineer, kind of, you've got a lot of patents on the wall type. Okay. So think MIT type or MIT of India type. And he really impressed me because he said, James, the real question is not what you can do for me. The question is, what can I do for you? He made it very clear that he had an open door. And if I ever needed anything and he could help in any way that was useful and provide, allow me to do power borrowing of his executive status, completely open to that, right? So I could not have asked for more support than I received from this initial SVP. And that's when it was during that time that we started to work to set up that initial diagnostics team that I talked about. And this was before Mitya and I got seriously engaged. Within 2 months, this person was gone. There was a lot of financial pressure to do something to help the profitability of the org. And a new VP, SVP came in. Great person, very skilled, very knowledgeable, not quite an engineer's engineer. And the optimizing goal of this person was not the same as the original SVP. So I almost never spent any significant time with this SVP. It was very difficult to get this person's ear, if not impossible. Yet with some of the momentum that was started initially, we still continued to run, and they continued to pay my bill rate. So I'm still flying back and forth every week, and that gets expensive. And there was still interest in that. There was certainly a lot of lip service to Agile. There just wasn't the same kind of, how can I help make this happen that I had with that original SVP. And that fundamental change in leadership is critical. And you'll see that again right there in that here you have that original SVP, and then 2 or 3 months later, we have this change. And you'll also see that in the timeline if you're following along in the timeline. Now, later, way towards the end of the engagement, you'll find that Mitya is reporting up through this hardware VP. So even though this is a hardware VP, the truth is there's a lot of software, there's a lot of firmware under that, including the BIOS code, which is, it's, if assembly code counts as firmware and low-level C code, not C++, but C, cross-compiled to a target counts as software, which it does, that still included software. So don't be confused by the hardware VP nomenclature, but do pay attention that the hardware VP was very supportive. Mostly the hardware VP was, hey, Mitya, if you say this is the right thing to do, then go do it. And so there was enough trust in Mitya that if Mitya was on board, then this hardware VP was on board. And there also was a QA, a VP who was very supportive. But the software VP, who was involved in a lot of the teams that worked on that, the very much the middleware stuff, was more passively aggressive. When the hardware VP left towards the end of my engagement there, about a year, a little over a year and a half, a little under a year and a half there, all of a sudden everybody started reporting into that VP, that software VP, and that sort of caused some things to tumble. So that will come up, and that's important. Geography. So all Mitya's folks were in Portland and the greater San Francisco area. There were also some people in India that were doing BIOS code. They were reporting to a different director level they didn't join till we got up to that hardware VP. And again, you'll see that on the org chart. But they were almost all co-located. So the group in Portland was, I don't know, it has like 30 desks in it plus a server room, something like that. And in San Francisco, you've got several floors of people, but all the people that were working for Dimitri were all clustered in a corner. And we actually changed offices a few times. We changed buildings. There's some refurbishment going on and whatnot, but we were always in some co-located area. And the QAs that we got to help us that were from the QA, now we treated them just like normal team members. We brought them in and they were part of our team, and treated like any other team member for all practical purposes, except they were still reporting up through a different reporting chain, which caused a little bit of problems, but not a lot, because we had that we had the support that we did from that software VP. Sorry, from the quality assurance VP, not VP, director. No, VP. Yeah, VP. A peer to Mitria's hardware VP. If Victor were here editing my case study, Victor would make sure to point out that these are really like, think of them as testers, because quality is an outcome of the system. Quality assurance is something you bolt on is a misnomer, and he's right. I've gone ahead and left these labeled as QA because that's what you're going to recognize them as. Know that the concept of quality assurance is something you bolt onto an org obviously doesn't work. So Victor was taking issue with, as we edited the case study, with some of the how do we word that and how do we pull that out, and we'll have to tweak it a bit and figure out how. Here is an interesting trick. So remember I said that we said we're only going to bother to fix the newest hardware generation, and we'll let all the old hardware run the way it's historically run. So for the teams that are in India doing bug fixes to the existing legacy BIOS code base, we're just going to leave them alone, let them run under the standard waterfall that they're used to being run with. And even those that are reporting up through Mitria that are still doing bug fixes and such, and small improvements to the older code base that's related to the older generation of hardware, we're still going to leave them under an old mechanism. We're not going to pull them into this less stock structure. As BIOS engineers that were reporting up through Mitria wrapped up some of those some of the work on the legacy systems, or the supporting legacy hardware generations, we would roll them into this structure. So so we started with just 3 teams. Within 4 months or so, I don't remember exactly, it kind of morphed a bit. We had pulled in 2 more teams because Mitria had people that had rolled off doing the other work, and we rolled them into new teams. And then we may have shuffled the team boundaries a bit, or the teams may have shuffled their own team boundaries. They actually decided who their teams were. Except in Portland's case, it was kind of obvious that Portland would form its own team. Now, what this did is it delayed the politics of dealing with the org chart and the aspects in India until we had successfully demonstrated a lot of success. So we had shown what was possible with this new approach. And I think that had we not lost the hardware VP, we would have been able to solve the India problem as well. Mitria and I would have flown back to India, had some conversations, we would have worked the politics, we would have smoothed it out, and we would have been able to fix that structural issue eventually, had we not lost our hardware VP. So it's an interesting strategy. It's very unusual. And it's also unusual that we're growing from the bottom of the tech stack instead of going kind of from the top of the tech stack and working our way deeper and deeper. So it's a very odd place that we started, but it worked. I'm watching my time. So when we launched, we got in a room for several days, brainstormed, put lots of stuff on the wall. The knowledge of what was needed was dispersed more broadly than any other time I've seen it, where every one of these guys are rocket scientist guys. These are very sharp engineers. first rate, but because of the way they had been working, it wasn't uncommon that person A would know one small piece of the pie, one piece of the puzzle, and person B would know another piece of the puzzle, person C would know another piece of the puzzle, and you had to go through all 30, 40 people as a group. We had to get in a room and brainstorm and figure out what was involved. Mitya, can you talk about that for like, I don't know, a minute or so? You always tell it nicely. You know, we were in that corner room with all the glass and we brainstormed got a bunch of stuff out of our head.
Yeah, so this you mean the kind of the very first, or one of the very first, right?
Yeah, the very first 2 or 3 days that we were doing Inception. This is after we had run through training with everybody. But
yeah,
we were ready to launch the teams.
Yeah, so there were, there was some challenges of doing that. One of them is, maybe I'll start with challenges. One of the challenges was that the team was distributed, and our objective was to create a single single list of stories. And as James mentioned, the team was kind of separated by specialties, and so some specialties ended up in Portland and some specialties ended up in San Jose, and yet we were working on a single kind of storyline. And
we had flown in the Portlanders, right? They had flown in for that week, as I recall.
They were on the call, on the phone.
Oh, okay.
So they did their own, and we did our own in San Jose, and that was part of the challenge.
But video is ubiquitous here.
Yeah.
They make the hardware that does it, so it's cheap.
Yeah. So doing doing this kind of work was also new. It's the first time that everybody's work that they know how to do, they know how, the sequence of events in every cycle, they had to break it down and write it into consumable steps. And so that was a challenge, but it's interesting. After initial, it took a little bit to get going, partly because when you know how to do something, you don't really have the steps exactly. I mean, you just sit down and do it, and then it's done and shipped, and you move on to the next thing. And so people had to think, okay, how is it that I do what I do? What are the steps? What are the features that I enable? How do I call them? How do I change the wording from, I need to enable this dim to a user story? I think that was one of the big, shifting moments or challenges, is to.
But that came later, right? We just got sticky notes on the wall.
That came later. Meeting. That's true. Right. And then, one of the interesting things that happened is that now everybody's tasks, everybody's stories or tasks that would later be changed into stories or later become stories, they were on everyone's display. They were on the walls, they were on the windows. As James said, that room was mostly, I would say, half walls, half windows. It was a corner conference room, and these stickers were on the windows and the walls everywhere, on the whiteboards. And then it came time to kind of pull it all together, and people started looking at tasks that are in other areas, not an area of their own expertise. And actually, from that came a lot of contribution to completeness of these tasks, of these features. Is that people, again, when you have familiarity with a subject, you may omit things that are that come naturally to you. So from this next step of kind of cross-pollinating the team came more completeness of the big picture of what needs to be done to get, in this case, BIOS from one stage to another stage.
For those of you familiar with blitz planning, it's basically what we did. You know, silent writing for a few minutes. Everybody writes all the things they think they need. We'd put it on a wall. Mitya would group it into different groups. Then we would we'd find logical groupings, and then we'd go again. When Mitya got tired, someone else on the team would stand up and kind of do the facilitation, because I'm always trying to back myself up to lead the least possible, right? So the more I can let them lead, the better, the more they own it. And they certainly didn't, they just needed to point it in the right direction. So normal blitz planning activities, but it took like a day and a half to get it out of everybody's head. It did not come out easy.
Yeah.
There's just so much of it. I've never seen this much information scattered as broadly as it was scattered here. In such, you know, really sharp guys and gals. After that, once we had the sprints up and going, we were already in the first sprint. We started doing what was basically a form of cross-team refinement or multi-team refinement. But in this case, it was the people who know the most about these particular stickies, let's get together and let's flesh out better PBIs. Now, we wrote them in user story format, but obviously they're not strictly speaking user stories because they're really about a component. But we would do that to the point that we had everything flushed out in our electronic tool. Then we printed everything back out. We threw it all on the wall, and we started looking for, Mitya and I started looking for what is a natural sequence of this, because Mitya was acting as a product owner, or to be precise in less terms, a fake product owner, because the real product owner would be actual product management, which we weren't yet to that point until we could grow into a more full requirement area. But we put everything on the wall, started to find where things had affinities. We eventually ended up with what is sort of a combination of a snake-like product backlog and a user story map. So it's just kind of a story mapping type of exercise. And then, of course, as we would do this, we would bring in, we would touch base with whoever we needed. So we would bring in, if Mitya and I were here focused on, you know, 2 or 3 of these sticky notes here, we would grab someone from the teams that knows more about them and ask clarifying questions. And then when it made sense, we'd bring in the whole team and shuffle the board more, right? So the whole teams did multi-team refinement to dream these up. And then Mitya and I threw them on a wall again and tried to massage them, pulled in more people for insight anytime we needed it. And then towards the end, we made sure to bring everybody in, as well as putting the guys in Portland on video, and have them double check everything we did, and see what we overlooked and whatnot. And then we also did a quick affinity estimation, or elephant board, or whatever you want to call it. It's the affinity estimation technique, to get a rough sizing on them all. After that, we were able to transition to more regular cadenced refinement. But that was how we got our initial product backlog fleshed out, which is really a component backlog. We always had a handy helper if we needed some tape. And here you can see a task board in the background. So very handy helper there. Definition of done. Historically, this code had been, it was as bad as you would think, as you would ever see. They were doing copy paste reuse from one generation of hardware code to another, and we're not making use of the pluggable layers that existed from an AMI BIOS that was given to us that was then customized. And this team, these teams, they said, we're tired of this. We're going to stop it. And you know, I didn't tell them you should do this. I didn't know enough about BIOS. They knew the problems were there. they just hadn't been empowered to, or felt empowered to stop it. And so when they were empowered to stop it, they said, hey, let's stop doing what we've done in the past. Let's make it where never again do we have to do this copy paste reuse. Let's start using pluggable layers unless we absolutely can't for whatever reason. And so they put that in their definition of done from, I think, the first sprint. It evolved a bit later. You see a little more refined version of the same thing. Triage guidelines, this deals with what's a real fire, what's a fake fire. And it would be nice to, for an individual team member to say, hey, this is a fake fire. And Mitya is not here to tell you as a product owner, but if he were, he would say it is, and this is why he would say it is. So this allows us to be respectful of the product owner's judgment as to what is and isn't most important, while allowing team members to respond instantly when there is an ad hoc request that may be a real fire. And then it also allows us to benefit from the collective wisdom of all the team members, within the entire product development group, of their wisdom of what should and shouldn't be a real fire. So we're able to have a group discussion about it and come to consensus on what it should be and validate that decision with the product owner. So it is the product owner's decision, but it's informed by the group. And then it allows us to respond very quickly. It's almost like classes of service and pull rules in Kanban. It's a variation of that. Here's some reference content. I'm not going to read it, but it should generate some good questions. Let's see, it's almost 6. Do we want to take a 5-minute break and then come back with questions?
Sure, I think that's a fine idea. Give everybody a quick break, and then we'll jump right into questions. I have a few questions from others lined up. I got a few for myself I'll put at the end, and we'll jump right into them. So really appreciate that presentation. Thank you. Yeah, I was trying to tee up the first question. So the first one I got there is, how did this team structure evolution tie in with the training of the BIOS teams, specifically to help resolve key team dysfunctions?
So let me ask the first part, and then I'll have to clarify the second part. The first part is, as you see on the timeline, over the course of, because we had so many people involved, it took me 2 cohorts to train San Francisco for everyone that was going to be in the initial BIOS teams. And it took me another, which is like 2 or 3 days of training, I think 2 days. And then, so it took, in 1 week, I was able to train 2 cohorts in San Francisco. And then the following week, I trained 1 cohort in Portland. And then, Mitya went with me to both of the San Francisco he attended, and participated. I wouldn't say he quite co-trained with me, but he certainly was active in a leadership capacity within the training. And then when we trained Portland, and we made sure to pull in the people that we thought were going to be QAs on the team as well, even though they technically reported to a different part of the org. And then when did Portland, it wasn't Mitya, but it was a friendly director involved, the same one that had helped with the diagnostics team. And again, we made sure to line up some QA talent that was going to be there when we did that. So it took about 2 weeks of back-to-back training to train everybody up. The following week, we did the team kickoff activities that included, what is our definition of done? What are our working agreements? What are our, let's self-form into teams. What do we want our team boundaries to be? Who's in what team? And self-select into what team you want to be in. But of course, the thing that took most of the time there was that brainstorming of getting our product backlog out of our head. The other stuff only took about half a day in this case. So it was remarkably quick for the other stuff, but the product backlog stuff was a bear. And this is because this team had been working together for a while. So to answer the question of how did the structure and training tie in? We trained and we immediately launched the new structure, the next week. So instant, boom, boom. And we were instantly in the new structure as soon as we trained and we launched. But there was what was the question again? There's a second part to the question.
It's about the I think he wants to know about the key team dysfunctions, and maybe Mitya would like to jump in there too. What were, because I had a similar question, like what were the motivational factors that made you appreciate James' approach with LeSS? What problems,
Oh, yeah. Okay.
What problems or team dysfunctions did you see that you're like, yeah, this is going to help with that?
And James,
Mitya, you're up. Yes, go ahead.
Oh, we'll come right back. We'll come right back to you, Julian. Sorry, 1 second.
Okay.
So first the word, no team dysfunctions. Obviously, it was perfect team. But maybe I'll start with David. Your second part of the question: what made me become interested and convinced that using James' time and expertise to train the team and to really help lead the team, co-lead the team through this transition would be valuable, is that somehow I had a sense that this LeSS structure would identify problems, if you will. So problems such as, what's the word I'm looking for? The inefficiencies, for example, problems such as inefficiencies, problems such as people's deliverables on a weekly, bi-weekly basis and tracking those deliverables. Problems such as keeping a flat structure, yet having leads that are actively and visibly leading the team and teams. And I also saw this specialization that James described very well as a problem as well. If one person does one small already specialized, but BIOS is already specialized, and if one person does specialized of specialized, not only it's I think it's a negative in the kind of long-term career point of view, but it's also negative from business point of view, organizational point of view. It's harder to fill in for peaks in some areas when there are valleys in other areas in terms of workload. So, and it's great to have the entire team understanding everything from top to bottom. As James says, being able to stitch from top to bottom the whole software. If you have people that don't understand, imagine you have in the BIOS area, right, which is again for most of the world is just this one small area, and in that area there's a person who understands just one little corner. How does the DIM initialize, and that's it. Not to diminish that expertise. It's a very, very specialized, very important, and very difficult part. But wouldn't it be nice if that person can also do simple things like selecting a boot device? So those are I think those are all problems, and I think those problems LeSS addressed very well, and it also exposed problems that perhaps were not visible, in terms of how people work with each other. You're not with approach that we took and structure that James helps us implement and guided us through implementing. every 2 weeks we were all together and discussing what happened in the last 2 weeks and what went well, what didn't, in retrospective. I think that was a tremendous help. We also, we added some practices that I thought were cool. I don't know if I know not everybody on the team thought they were cool. Like before the retrospective, we did like improv warm-up exercises. I was freshly graduated from an improv class at the evening class at Stanford at the time, back when we used to do these things, like go in person to classes. And I thought it was great. It's not like to be the best comedian, but it's really just to they really have nothing to do with comedy. They just have to do with being comfortable among other people and knowing that nobody dies in the process. I thought they were great, but not everybody loved it, for sure.
Yeah, I'll just make one comment. I think the improv thing is great because you have to say yes and you can never negate someone else's part of the story. You can only add to it. And when there's a lot of big egos on a team, that can help them start to build on other people's ideas rather than just make it all their own. But yeah, that was good. I want to go back to Julian because it was originally Julian's question, and I want to see if he has any clarifying follow-up questions. So go ahead, Julian.
I appreciate that. I was going to try to chime in to clarify on the way, but James and Mitya, you guys addressed what I was asking. I was looking at your timeline, James, and that's where I got the team dysfunction in month 7. And I'm wondering if the self-selection process that the teams did as they were integrated into your team, your BIOS teams, if that was what was helping resolve some of that team dysfunction that you alluded to. So that's what I was trying to get at. But I think you and Mitya both addressed what I was asking.
It's on the timeline.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think what was a 7 month, and I think there was one. There was another aspect of.
This was the grumpiness in Portland wasn't completely on board, right? And although you weren't there for the training and we did the kickoff quasi remotely, I think there were 1 or 2 people that might have been in San Francisco, but I'm not sure. But you and I did a trip pretty quickly after we kicked them off and kind of nudged them a little more. That was the yeah. Okay, let me be quiet.
No, yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There was another dysfunction, and I wonder if that was also the one that you highlighted. Is that while we had the code review practices and things like that, some in this practice of agile less, everyone was looking at everybody's code. So the dysfunction was that, again, that's, some people appreciate it and some people, no, hey, I've owned this for 20 years. Don't tell me how to rewrite it, right? And so now we have people from one area working on another area. And what happens, people have fresh ideas, people have good ideas, bad ideas, different kinds of ideas. But there's this inherent, I know how to do this better. This worked for so that was dysfunction that had to be addressed for sure.
Awesome.
Yep. I think it's important to notice that I didn't train them and launch them. Structure drives culture. It isn't like we trained them and we launched them and then I ran away. The truth is, I trained them, we launched them, and then I basically stood in as the Scrum Master because of lack of a better option at the moment. I basically played a very high functioning Scrum Master role for, I don't know, several months, right? It isn't like poof, you train them and voila, now and you launch them and voila, they're scrumming, right? I don't know if I kind of saw that in one of Joel's, hiding in Joel's question kind of there. That's why I mentioned that. Awesome. Okay, David, back to MC. Back to you.
Okay. All right, great. So the next question that's up, it's actually visible in the chat there, but it says, I'm curious what kind of training teams get before they change into a more or less like way of working. I'm using Seattle Scrum Company's video-based training to train very basic Scrum concepts. And I'm assuming coaches and POs get training, but less pun get less sure about what kind of training to offer the devs. So the 3-day less practitioner training sounds like a big ask. So what do you think?
Structure drives culture. There is nothing quick and easy about this. We took the team down for, well, everybody was in 2 days of training and doing other work when they weren't in 2 days of training. And then it was 3 or 4 days of launching the team, right? So that's across, 40-ish people. And I'm only teaching them basic Scrum mechanics, right? A little bit of estimation and, of course, there's the ongoing immersive experience of how do you learn to run a retrospective well? Well, the best way is you actually go to retrospectives and you participate in them and you learn how to run good retrospectives. How do you run sprint reviews well? You participate in them and you come to understand what makes for a good sprint review. Same for sprint planning and all. So I'm basically coaching them through these activities, but all that we're doing in training is preparing them for that. And if leadership is not willing to give 3 days of training to do something as drastic as what's involved here, you're obviously not ready to even think about this kind of change. This is not structure drives culture, and if you don't deal with the structure, you will not see significant change. You will not see significant benefit. And what's interesting here is that to the extent that we dealt with structure, we reaped tremendous rewards from it. In the areas that we didn't go after the structure, so when you get above the director layer, we didn't fix those parts of the org, and not fixing those parts of the org came back to haunt us. Ultimately, the reason that things disintegrated at the end, after I left, after Mitya left, was because the underlying higher level executive structures were not fixed, and because I had lost some key sponsorship. I think there's some notes at the very bottom of that handout that may be relevant here. They're Larmian. Now, by the way, we were not formally speaking implementing LeSS. We were implementing Scrum with multiple teams. And how do you do that? Well, you have a single combined product backlog. You have some sort of, you need a combined sprint review, obviously. You need a common definition of done because you're all touching the same code. You need, when you get to retrospectives, you need some sort of cross-team mechanism because some things are affecting all teams, and you need something that is specific to individual teams. Now, it turns out that this aligns with LeSS. In fact, if you look at my website, there's an article that talks about deriving LeSS. And if you read that, you'll see that the way LeSS works is the natural way to run multiple Scrum teams in parallel. It's the very natural thing to do. I don't think I'd even read Larman's books at that time. And when I read them as part of this, let's get the LeSS wand, everything I read was like, yeah, that makes sense. That aligns with my own experience. So there was a point here and I lost it. Oh, I remember. Towards the bottom, dealing with structure drives culture. So there's the 1st and 5th of Craig Larman's laws of organizational behavior. Organizations are implicitly optimized to avoid changing the status quo, middle and first level manager and specialist positions and power structures. In large established orgs, culture follows structure. In tiny young orgs, structure follows culture. Parallel organization. This deals more with that diagnostics team, which we didn't go into. Parallel organization is not a pilot, and there were problems there with the people on the diagnostics team continued to report up through their various directors, and those directors are still being driven by a waterfall context in the bigger picture. And because we didn't deal with that structure, it caused problems. That also turned out to cause some problems for BIOS. The good news is that all the BIOS guys were reporting up through Mitya, at least within North America. So we didn't have that problem for quite a while. But we still were faced with this waterfall context that was driving us.
So
Established,
Joel,
go ahead.
I was going to pivot to Joel back one more time and see if we
Sure.
got to the heart of his question or if you had a follow-up question. Yeah, go ahead.
A little bit. It's been helpful, but I feel like I'm doing a similar thing with my group as far as putting up less and looking at what elements of less are adoptable and
Sorry.
And which are, we're not ready for yet or aren't applicable perhaps. And so I'm trying to learn about less. That's why I'm here. I'm trying to train a lot of my teammates on just some of the basic Scrum stuff, which is why I've been using that Michael James material. But I'm not yet certain about how much of our organization needs to go to more of a full-blown training to get less training so that they're, aware of that stuff versus could a lot of people just get good Scrum training and have a less, well-trained less coach and a less trained product owner in the group? And could some less expertise in a couple of places plus some basic Scrum expertise, or what I mean is training, not expertise necessarily.
Basically, I taught them Scrum. That is what those 2 days was basically Scrum training.
All right, that's what I'm doing.
I had some of the knowledge of how do you run it as a group. But I do think it's important that you deal with as much of the structural stuff up front as possible, right? And that, before the launch, you were working the way you used to work. Now we're in new teams, the rules are different. You are now aligned with the rules of the Scrum Guide, right? You are aligned, I would add in the rules of LeSS, right? Which supplement those, which are more prescriptive and avoid a lot of the traps. I am extremely, you'll see, I should push the book, right? If I was on Jay Leno, I talk about, Larman calls it the contract game.
Yeah.
Eli Goldratt, it's wordier, but it gets to the heart of it a little better, which is what I talk about here. He says treating estimates as commitments is in conflict with the desire of the individual to be seen as a reliable person. And he elaborates on it. And I basically elaborate on Goldratt's argument in here. And if you treat estimates as commitments, you will destroy morale and transparency within the teams because you're holding people accountable for things they don't control.
Yep.
You will destroy quality because there's not personal safety to commit to craftsmanship.
Yep.
And then thirdly, you will destroy forecast accuracy because now everyone is keeping the safety to themselves in Goldratt terms. They won't tell you that they're done until, they're within 10% or so of the forecasted time.
Yeah.
And if they think they're going to take a lot longer, they'll do what Larman would call the dirty bag of tricks and start cutting corners, right? So if you do not fix the estimates being purely estimates, personal safety for craftsmanship, nothing you do is going to matter. So you absolutely have to fix that. And you'll see Scrum does that, of course, with real clear role definitions. The developer's role is quality, quality, quality as explicitly articulated in the definition of done. And the product owner's job is what is the most important, but you don't get to say what is and isn't going to make it into the release, right? You only get to say what's most important, and the teams will pull from the top of the priority, right? So absolutely critical that you fix that problem. Absolutely critical that you fix the engineering discipline aspects. I would argue that not writing automated unit testing, maybe not doing tests first, but certainly not having automated unit testing is unprofessional. Whether or not you want to do the Bob Martin 3 laws TDD, I'm more of a test first, less of a TDD guy. I think TDD is a great hygiene practice and is a great shoe level technique can be very valuable at times. But craftsmanship, you absolutely have to go after that. You have to go after the personal safety, and you really need your retros to run well.
Yeah.
Jim?
And then if you're finding that it takes lots of managerial protection in order to create the kind of safety that you need, which was certainly the case in this case study, what's becoming very clear to me from conversations with Victor as we edit my case study is that in itself is a symptom of not dealing with structure. If you deal with the structure right, up front, high enough up the food chain, and more importantly, you get above that contract game being played, then you won't have to have management that's providing that air cover. A lot of what happened within BIOS happened because Mitya was providing that air cover. But if the structure was right, he wouldn't have had to provide that air cover.
I see.
We only fixed structure at the team level. We didn't fix it at the executive level, and it came down to bite us. It came back to bite us.
Jerry, did you have a question?
I wanted to comment because I think that the question is really important that Joel's brought up. So when I'm listening to everybody, what I'm thinking the most about is, when you're first teaching Scrum, you're somewhat doing a bottoms up, and you're teaching Scrum. What's important to understand about LeSS and the lean frameworks is that it's not just Scrum, it's everything else that James just said. What are you automating? What is your engineering excellence going to be? All that stuff. And while you can get started with just scrumming, there will come a point where if you haven't socialized and got your leadership team on board with taking that training, and I do think that, 3 days with Craig Lehrman, it's a game changer. It's an absolute game changer. And then you're absolutely going to see an acceleration in change. And so, while you're doing what you're doing, and you're there, you're teaching Scrum, you're trying to get things moving, find a way to get those leaders on board. I had meetings just this week where I was talking to folks. I was like, and I was like, Craig Lehrman's coming to Minnesota. I think we need to send these people, and we need to send some people. And the response was, oh yeah, you can take those people. And I said, no, I mean you too. Oh, me too? It's like, yeah, this isn't going to work if you're not going to, leader. And so you might need to have a number of conversations. You might need to find a way to get them to yes. But if you don't have your leadership on board, you're only going to get so far. And you might be able to celebrate so much progress. But at some point you'll realize you're now stuck because the leadership isn't on board. And because they're not on board, you don't get the organizational redesigns.
Jerry, to punch that point, Mitya and I have had a conversation a few weeks back with one of the key sponsors, the guy who was basically approving my time cards at this client. And we talked about, doesn't it always seem to fall apart in the end? And the reason it did was because we didn't deal with that at the level that we could. What makes my case study so interesting is how much went well and how much failed, and the interesting ways in which it failed and the interesting ways in which it succeeded. Mitya, you want to comment on that? Like that conversation we had with Trent the other day was insightful.
Yeah, I agree. I agree that you have to get leadership involved, and of course the direct management, and the higher in an organization you go, if you manage to get everyone truly on board in the organization, from GM or CEO, whatever the size of the organization is. I mean, like a big company, 50,000, 100,000 people company, you don't have to go all the way to CEO maybe, but GM of a business unit or something along those lines. then you'd have much better success. We've also seen, to that point, we've seen teams where that ended up working together with a bias team, and I think they were trained, right? The QA team, the team members were trained, but the management of that team wasn't really on board, and so it actually caused more issues. Like they had to live between the waterfall model and the LeSS model, and that made their lives more difficult. So absolutely.
Remember, I lost my SVP.
Yeah.
That SVP that I came in and said, hey, the real question, James, is not what you can do for me. The question is, what can I do for you to help with this? And 2 months later, that was gone. So we would have had that, but we didn't. But yet the momentum from the initial push, we managed to somehow continue to make inroads.
All right, I'm going to go to the next question. So this one's from Sam, and you're free to jump in. Why don't you just jump in and ask your question here, Sam? I just put it in the chat for anybody who's wants to look at it.
Yeah, so as we were talking, this question is kind of directed to Mitya. We talked about some of the kind of unique aspects of, you know, the timing of when the software is available and ready, and some of the, you know, the things that are at stake if you were to miss deadlines and things like that. So I'm wondering, kind of thinking back to the adoption and the work that you and James did together, were there any other kind of key economic elements like that you maybe could have connected more directly to the adoption as you were implementing it? It seems for me that a lot of times when we have these discussions, it's kind of like you have to find these things that really, you know, connect directly from what the product team is looking at and measuring to what the tech team is really optimizing for, right? So I'm just curious if there was anything like that you thought about retrospectively that you might have been able to focus on more directly in terms of the, you know, what the adoption was optimizing for within this product.
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, certainly some parts of the development methodology we had to make sure fit the economics, because, you know, the MVP of this product, I mean, MVP of any product is critical, but MVP of this product is actually quite extensive. I mean, percentage wise of the whole product, there isn't a whole lot you can you know, so first, there isn't a whole lot you can postpone, because, you know, most things are just, you know, such a low level code. There's not a lot of things that you can postpone. So that's one thing we had to deal with. And then second is, for the things that you can postpone, when is the next time you can release this BIOS, right? So I don't know if I'm answering your question. I mean, in my mind, that's economics, or business at least, aspect. You know, in terms of economics, you know, for example, you know, hours spent and dollars spent effectively on the product, which way, you know, do you get more bang for the buck? You know, do you get more bang for the buck when your measurement is, if I find 1,000 bugs in a software, that means it's good quality. That literally is the, I'm not sure if I'm unique in existing in that kind of environment, but that's the quality measurement that I was used to until then. To look, we don't have any bugs to report, because we as we go, we fix bugs. And I think that has, you know, so I don't have the data to say that it has measurable economic impact, but I hope it does, because we only went through this with one cycle. You know, it would be much more interesting data-wise to see when we go through this, you know, 6 months later, 1 year later, a few of these cycles, how does economics of this type of approach add up? I don't have the answer in, for the how it turned out, but it certainly it certainly we were discovering issues discovering defects much sooner, discovering design issues, how components communicate to each other, both within the BIOS and outside of, if you remember this picture that James had,
Right.
outside of the BIOS into other components. We discovered a whole bunch of issues very early on, or much earlier on. And I think that had economic impact in terms of economics. We were able to ship good quality code, in the right time. But I think there's another part was that, and that was difficult, is that we were operating in the Scrum or LeSS, as I know now, LeSS model, while most of the organization was operating in the waterfall model, and so that's where the air cover was required, because what does the rest of the organization want? They want the whole product now. When do I start QA? Oh, give me the whole product and I'll start QA. Give me the whole product and I'll find all the bugs, and then we'll know the quality is right. Don't give me this, this is pre-MVP, and then in 2 weeks you deliver these features, in 2 weeks you deliver these features, and it's all working because we tested it and we automated it. So that was, I think that also relates to, that kind of relates to how other parts of the business see the economics in terms of, will you deliver the code I need to sell the product on time and with quality? It's hard for the other parts of the business to see how you're progressing.
Back to air cover. Is there any element of your relationship with the hardware VP that played here that's relevant to the room?
I don't know if it's my relationship or just his personal kind of outlook on managing teams or creating or managing organization. That I think that maybe more had to do with it. But certainly he and I worked together for I don't know how many years, 7 years prior, or maybe 6-7 years prior to that, building this product, and that played a role probably. But I think it's more just we were very lucky that the person with this kind of outlook was leading the hardware organization.
So Sam, did you have any follow-up questions before we move to the next one? Go for it.
That was great insight. I guess the specifics in terms of, if I in this organization, if I was on the product side, and I'm thinking about I'm the guy that's selling this end product to the enterprise. Were there any things that you could draw between what you were seeing in the quality improvements to specific pain points or specific kind of product strategy pieces that you might have been able to connect the dots more directly across from your engineering group directly into the product group?
Product meaning like a product management, or?
Right. So the folks that are responsible for how do we bring this product to the market and sell this kind of data center on a forklift, et cetera, to the enterprise? Was there some kind of direct connection that you think you could have made to their product strategy that may have changed the way that they were perceiving the transformation when you kind of started giving it water and light and all the things that you were doing?
Yeah, that's a good question. In general, so first I'm going to start directly answering questions. So on the BIOS side, there's historically less product involvement, like product management team involvement. If you look at that big picture of the whole solution, most of the product is on the hardware definition, and product is on those higher level software, middleware, as James described the definition. On the BIOS, it's very, very less, although a lot of features that the solution delivered went all the way through, from GUI all the way to the BIOS, and on that there was a product involvement. I think there was appreciation from I don't know. I hope there was appreciation, because we again, the one benefit of this approach was that we found design issues, assumptions with new features that were delivered in that cycle that had to be stitched from GUI to BIOS, or drilled all the way from GUI to BIOS. You often find cases where you have to go through 4 layers of software to get some data in or some data out. So from that sense, I think there was appreciation that it's found early and it doesn't affect the product. That doesn't affect the product launch, doesn't affect the MVP, doesn't affect the what features are in the sales sheet.
The next question is from Julian. I'm going to put it in the chat. And Julian, would you like to kick it off?
Thanks again, David. James and Mitya, you guys have been answering this in like 5 different ways so far. I'm asking about communications, and I like Samuel's question as well. I think the big thing I'm asking is about the SVP or the new GM that came in. Was there any in retrospect, is there anything that could have been done to convey value of what you were doing, or to even work with people around his or her peers, to get them bought in to the value or the efficiencies you were finding, that you were just speaking to, using this LeSS approach?
Great question.
Mitya, I think you can do this better. I was doing everything I could with mostly not interest, but you've got more. You said in some meetings I didn't set in.
I think in the new GM actually was interested. I don't know how to say pro or interested in this approach, right? So on that level, there was an approval. Where it got muddy is everywhere in between, because it wasn't, I wasn't reporting to GM. There were, not everybody in the organization wanted this or believed in it. So that's on one side. On the other side, the GM wasn't involved in all the details where the project planning occurred. So I don't know if I'm answering your question directly.
But expressed no interest.
Yeah.
The new GM's optimizing goal was overall profitability, and if I have to cut the headcount in half, so be it. And this was not a bad person. This was a very bright person. This was a person who was sent in to do what is needed to return this division to a more profitable state in the short term. And that may mean some uncomfortable decisions.
So I think the question is more around, in retrospect, what could have you done differently to engage that person for a better effect?
One thing that just occurred to me, Julian, is that, and I may not be, this may not be the strongest. So I believe in like fixing everything myself and doing everything myself. But this was a few years ago, and I've learned a few things since then. And one valuable thing that I've learned since then is that there is a value in escalating problems, and escalating problems when sometimes it may not be comfortable for everybody to hear problems. So maybe that's one thing that we could have done differently, is to just say, hey, this thing that you like to be done and we like to be done, and is not really being done in the middle, right? Maybe like to actually vividly highlight this problem, that if we are to really change this organization as an organization, everybody has to change. And I don't know if we probably did, highlight that we need more help, and to kind of softly, but I don't know. I've seen this. I've seen kind of these escalations, and leaders sometimes need to know exactly the full picture and not figure it out themselves. I don't know, James, if that's.
Yeah, I don't know.
Could you have given him some less training, like some system modeling or anything?
I
along those
tried
lines?
everything.
Okay.
And nothing in my
Just thought
skill
I'd ask.
set at the time was
Yeah,
sufficient.
they were. Yeah, everybody. I think everybody in the organization was trained. It wasn't lack of knowledge, but again, but Julian, to answer also your question, quite honestly, I don't know. I hope that today I'd be able to walk to the GM and say, look, we've got this big problem. There's a group that is doing this, and there's a group that is doing this, and everybody else is not doing this. And unless we're doing it all together, we're not going to be able to succeed. In my imagination, I am doing that, but I don't know. Next time we'll see.
All right. So
Spoken
Vlad,
as a future VP, see?
So Vlad's got some good follow-up questions here in the chat. Vlad, do you want to, put it in your own words there?
Thank you. And yeah, well, pretty much I'm interested to know more of the details of what Julian asked, like what was VP was looking for instead of Scrum, and what was the argument, and where it was a struggle to kind of get the new VP on board.
Mitri, I think the focus was just elsewhere, right?
Yeah. I think it was it was a mandate to go and do it, but it wasn't really. Yeah, I think James' focus is a good word, good term. That the focus of actually accomplishing this, like what are the ways that you actually do it, was elsewhere. Maybe for the good reasons. The business needed adjustment and alignment. There was a lot of that required a lot of time. That required a lot of things from business side and emotionally. Like James said, that the business unit went through layoffs within that year that we were implementing this LeSS, and so I don't think it was VP. It was GM. I think we're talking about GM or VP. The head of business
SVP,
unit was
SVP, GM, yeah.
SVP, yeah. It wasn't that they didn't believe it, but it was, sounds nice. You have my full support to go do it, right? But not, there's a difference between you can go do it, I support you, to, hey, is this done? Can we have a daily meeting because this is not done? I sense this is not getting done. Can we meet daily until everybody's on board, right? I think
the
Vladimir,
complete opposite of James. The real question is not what you can do for me, but what can I do to help you help me, right? You tell me what you need. The door is open, feel free to come in every day, to the door was effectively closed.
Was there any dismantling of Scrum or cross-functional, cross-component teams, or was this new person? Did they not?
The devolution happened once you left, right, Mitri?
Yeah.
On the bio side.
Yeah. The dismantling happened in that, in the middle, from the middle.
A dismantle?
Dismantling meaning like this was a nice experiment. Let's all go back to the way we used to do things.
Componentized teams.
Yeah.
I assume.
A previous way of doing things?
Yeah.
It's that third org change that you want to look at. Figure 13. Therein started the doom.
Let's go back to what was before, because before it was so wonderful.
Well, figure 11 was great. Figure 12 was the new SVP is saying what Mitri just said. Hey, go forth. That's fine. We'll continue to pay James's bill rate. But we're not going to actively get that engaged because we're busy with some other stuff. But at least we're still going through this hardware VP, and the hardware VP is telling Mitria, hey, Mitria, you do what you think makes sense. And so as long as Mitri and I are doing what we think makes sense, as long as the testing people on the team are reporting up through someone who's protecting, helping protect us as well, we were good. As soon as that hardware VP left, and we have weak support or sort of indifferent support when it comes to day-to-day, let me help reach down and solve problems for you from the GM level, that's when things really started to collapse. That software VP had been eroding what had been done in the diagnostic effort, which we didn't cover much. That had already happened a good bit, but certainly when BIOS started reporting into that new software VP, and we lost the air cover from the hardware VP, which is figure 13, that was the beginning of the end. If you leave this kind of person who doesn't want to do this, and I'm not saying this was a bad person, very skilled, very intelligent, probably means well, but definitely not on board, right? If you leave that type of resistor in a significant managerial capacity, it is poisonous to any adoption efforts. And that was the case here.
Poisonous?
I would assume that the organization wasn't trying to commit suicide here, that this person, this VP that's not on board with this adoption, there was a reason that they were there. There's a reason the previous one resigned. And it sounds like there's more to the story, maybe, that, you know, the people pulling the levers thought that empowering this VP who wasn't on board was smart. Or
well, if the hardware VP left because there was a more attractive offer externally, okay, and because they were under the threat of looming threat of significant layoffs, right? Yeah. And if your job as a GM is to come and you have come to the conclusion after working with the organization, working with the division for about a year, you've come to the realization that of all the various approaches I've looked at that might be able to save the organization without a massive layoff, and none of them, in my judgment, seem to be the right thing, I'm going to have to make a massive layoff. I mean, like, we're going to go from like 4,000 to 2,000 people, okay? So massive, massive cut. I've lost my hardware VP. Do I really want to lose this seasoned engineer who's a VP down in the trenches, who understands where the bodies are buried, may or may not agree with this new Agile thing, but we're about to cut half the staff? Do I really want to lose that knowledge and have that walk out the door? Especially because in my GM role, I'm probably looking to go to the next division that may need this kind of heavy help, right? Of massive turnaround help. So my job as a GM is to get in, turn it around, and get out. And if I decapitate the sole VP that's left that has a clue of what the overall system is doing, then I'm kind of in a bad situation, even if they're not on board with the agileness, right? I'm not saying I agree with that decision. I'm simply saying that I can understand that perspective. Mitya, do you any politically safe things to say here?
You know, I agree with Joel that you know, you're absolutely correct that it's not like one way was you know, just nosedive, right, and another way was the opposite, right, of you know, we're bringing this rocket into space, right? The old way worked to a degree with its inefficiencies, with its problems, and you know, frankly, I think to most people didn't have amazing experience working in that environment. You know, and people don't have, I think, good experience working in an environment where you're told your ETA, and then you're held accountable to your ETA. You know, for example, I mean, there are many examples, but this is one.
Yeah.
And but on the other hand, you know, if you take an organization of I don't know, 1,000 people, what is the percentage that will say, no, I'm not doing this agile thing. I know what I'm doing. I know the software piece that I'm working on. I know how long it will take me to write this new feature because I wrote one just like this, 30 times before. And this new agile thing will make me uncomfortable. People have that reaction. People had that reaction in the BIOS team, and that required a lot of work from side of James and myself to guide them through it. And that kind of work would require the whole organization, should the whole organization would go through this transformation. And I think James correctly pointed out that the business objective at the moment was not to rework organization. It was to make the business keep the business viable, which it still is, and so they kind of achieved their objective. So at the time, reworking the whole organization was, I think, prohibitive, honestly, in many ways.
Even though it would fix the long-term problem. If you wanted to fix the strategic long-term innovation, adaptability, you'd have to go down the path that Mitri and I were going down. But if you're just trying to stop the initial bleeding, it's a little different story.
Yeah, I think that's where system modeling comes in, so you can help people connect those multi-layered dots, like how this impacts that, right? It's
maybe
it's too simple. If people's mind, I don't know.
Go ahead,
Vlad.
So leadership, many times leadership not sure about whether one way or another is better, and they tend to follow some strong voices of some of the technical leads or some managers saying like, I'm going to solve all your problems, just give me people and I will do this for you because I have qualifications. I'm an architect, I'm a technical guy, and then forget agile. So leadership say like, okay, this guy will solve my problems. But the question is like, how do we actually deliver value? I mean, is value visible? I mean, if the product is evolving rapidly and delivers a lot of value, that's success, and then the leadership would say, well, I want to do it the same way in that group and this group. But if it doesn't happen, then the question here, like, what happened? Why wouldn't the new VP just say, okay, we're going to continue doing this because it's going very well? Was he struggling to see the value of it?
Obviously, yes. But obviously not giving significant time and energy to finding out. There's not an openness to those discussions. I didn't have those discussions. There was not an opportunity to have those discussions.
That's tough. That's like when Craig Larman says, you don't deal with the no-nos, the people who are not willing to change. You got to change your organization. Unless you can go above them, I guess.
I find so we can talk about structure here a little bit. You'll notice that the ideal LeSS structure is there's head of product, and then you've got your product owners, your teams, your scrum masters. Everybody's very flat underneath that, right? There are no management layers. They're not there.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other side, if you read between the lines, is okay, if they are there, you put them in an impediment service, and they're being held accountable for removing impediments and moving the organization along, right? Now, how do you get to that state? You either go and, I don't want to say demote everybody while keeping their salary the same, but you either go and change their reporting structures and say, hey, regardless of title, you're now on a team. I don't know how you feel about that. Or you get to choose what team you're on, but you're going to be on a team. Or you build a parallel org and you avoid all the politics and you recruit into that parallel org and you build up this new parallel org. Now there the problem becomes, how do you build a bubble? And the challenge is from a product perspective. If it's a brand new product, it's easy, you go do that. But if you have an existing product, that's a harder strategy to implement to build that parallel org. But one of the advantages of that parallel org is that you don't have that middle. You kind of build it like a startup from day one. And what middle you do, you know, they know walking into the door that they have to be on board with this kind of management paradigm and this kind of structure, and B, if they're in a management role, they're probably going to be helping to remove impediments. Their job is to make management accountable for delivery, is to disempower the people doing the work. The role of management is to create the ecosystem that makes it possible for the teams to take ownership and do the work and deliver, right? But we don't want to disempower the people doing the work. And as soon as you start making management accountable for, you better hit this scope by this date and make sure your guys get on board, you're basically disempowering the teams instead of gardening, which is what was expected of a manager in a scaled agile context. That's a proper, you know, if we're talking nexus, we're talking less, something healthy.
Dealing with that, how do you strike that balance right now? And I work at a so-called startup, but we just hired an awful lot of managers into the organization, and they're some of our very newest employees, and me, their coach, is already saying, and what are you going to do? Get over there and stay out of our way, please. They don't like to hear that at all. Oh, we'll get you something to do. You can go chase down impediments for us. They don't want to hear that either. So the best I give to them is, you and me are going to be working on creating that environment that makes all this possible. And some of them.
And what you really need is their boss to get on board with this structure, and then have honest, open conversations with these people that have been hired and say, you know, if this is the structure we want, and this is, you can do system modeling, this is all the reasons we want this. What is the best thing from your career management perspective? Do you want to be a member of a team? Do you want to be on impediment service? Or do you think that we should help you find a role outside of the company and be supportive of your decision to do that? It may come to that. And anything short is probably just setting yourself up for trouble.
I'm worried about that.
And having those conversations is setting yourself up to get kicked out the door.
Yep, I'm familiar with that.
Joel, you're absolutely right. I mean, to worry and you know, I don't know, worry, maybe worry for yourself, but also worry for them, right? They'll find themselves in unknown territory. You know, I've seen, it sounds like I've seen the same things that you have, where, you know, managers say all of a sudden, not managers that report to me, but managers that are my peers, that say, no, wait a second, I create task lists, and then I divide the task list, and then I follow up whether the tasks are done. If that is done somehow organically within the teams themselves and team members themselves, what do I do? Well, yeah. you fulfill your role as a manager. You coach. I think you put it actually very. I love the way you said it. You go. How do you say? You go and build the environment. I think that's what you said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there is a certain psychological problem here. And the psychological problem for a manager is that the information the higher level manager gets from different places at times make them wonder what's going on, why those guys cannot fix all these problems. Let me try and do this. I will tell them what to do and everything will be hunky-dory. It is so tempting to fix it and step in and be hands-on manager and tell people what to do and keep people over a weekend and be a hero. That's a psychological problem of waterfall being on top and agile on the bottom. And if any,
you got to get rid of waterfall on the top.
Well, if any leader has to say when this feature will be in production on which date, that's a waterfall mentality. So we're talking timelines for delivering certain features in production.
I think the real fix here is that senior manager observes the behavior of the middle manager. And when the middle manager starts to act like a traditional middle manager, rather than I'm a gardener, how do I create the ecosystem? The senior manager steps in and says, I'm sorry, I think we need to have a conversation. Your role is, you are not accountable for delivery. I will never hold you accountable for delivery. I will hold you accountable for creating the right ecosystem, right? And to the extent that you violate this expectation of the role, you will be held accountable. To the extent that you in a negative way, to the extent that you are helping to create a positive ecosystem and working hard, and we all make mistakes, and that's fine, and we'll learn from them. Well, that's great. And how can I help you and guide you in that, right? So really, the problem is usually at least one level up, right? It's why is that manager acting the way that manager is acting? Well, it's probably because of a problem in the thinking of the person they're reporting to.
Yep. I see that. I don't know what you guys are up for time-wise, but I have a comment on that, and I see there's another question that you queued up that I've asked. I'll take whatever you guys are willing to offer.
Yeah, go ahead.
Today I had a conversation with one of the new managers I was referring to, and he asked me how to help set up the Azure DevOps tool so that he can see what his people are doing, and he wanted to understand the work that he's being accountable for and how it percolates through the system so he can see his people and what they're doing. And I said, I understand why you're asking that, and I understand what you're trying to get here, but I have a counter proposal I'd like you to hear. He said, I'd love for you to come to our backlog refinement meetings, because he has work that he wants to get done. But I said, come to our backlog refinement meetings and influence the product owner and team about the importance of this work. So there's a place you can get work kind of injected into the process, and then at the sprint review, you can see the results of those requests and be you're a stakeholder in this case, and don't worry about what happens between those 2 points. Do refinement, you can check in on our planning, come to our reviews, but please don't micromanage your people who are on our cross-functional team. And he responded pretty well to that. I think he could get where I was going with that line of conversation, to basically say, we don't want you trying to monitor your people so closely, because they're part of a cross-functional team, and I'm their coach, and you don't have to worry about, are they busy or whatever. That's no problem there. He responded pretty well to that, but he said, well, I've got goals that I need to meet that my manager has for me. And I used one of those as an example. I said, well, you know what, let's hear one of your goals. And that goal, I share that goal with you. And another one of our peers is, some sort of a manager or something, and he has that goal too. So all three of us have the same goal. And so let's not call that your team's goal. That's all of our shared goal. So you aren't going to be able to monitor the delivery of your goal through your people, because it's a cross-functional goal. And it seemed to make sense to him that this crazy Scrum thing that we're doing it does work. It just is different than what he's familiar with, because he's used to just being in tune with his, the people that report to him. He's not used to cross-functional teams where that's different.
Joel, I don't know, but there's an idea. As you describe the problem, I'm thinking to myself, and it's easier as a third party because,
Sure.
Maybe if you and the manager and the product owner, and maybe that manager's manager, got into a room and had a discussion, and you talk through, obviously we don't want to hold the manager accountable for delivery because that disempowers the team doing the work, right? Yep. We all have this as a common goal, so we want to make sure that the product owner is prioritizing things in a way that will help us achieve these goals. and do whatever we can, see if the product owner has any challenges. And then maybe there's something about the value of estimates as estimates, avoiding the contract game. Maybe there's a causal loop. You know, how can you facilitate a discussion, especially since you seem to have somewhat open, you have a manager who's somewhat open to this conversation, right? So it's, you're not in you're in a good place there.
Very.
So maybe there's a way to get the right people in a room and talk through the conflicts and come out of it with what sounds like you would come out of it with is, yes, we thought we had a conflict, but the truth is we were violently in agreement. We were just doing things that were not in alignment with what we actually wanted and didn't even realize it. And now we're on the same page and we are aligned and your problem goes away. You might even have the senior executive say, well, I didn't mean for your goal to be written that way because I realized that I put you in conflict. Let's change that. Let's make it the product owners, or I don't know. Let's change this in a way that is respectful of the people doing the work, is respectful of what we know about the contract game, is respectful of, you know, everything we know from Agile Lean theory. Maybe that would work. Maybe it wouldn't. I don't know.
I think I have it easy in this particular. It's a full-time job, but you know, it's like an engagement sort of. A lot of openness, and I'm trying to take as much advantage as I can of that, you know, for good, to, like as I said earlier, win the hearts and minds of managers to support the way that we're working, and they love the idea that rather than create yet another meeting where we synchronize about these things, that we're like, no, there's a place for that. It's called backlog refinement and planning and review and you know, maybe parking lot after stand up or something. So there's a desire to reduce our meeting load, and I have a desire to get us into one more coherent process that we're adopting, instead of a foot in less and a foot in waterfall and a foot in scrummer fall or whatever. And this is one way to get there, is to utilize the meetings that we already have on the books for, you know, for better outcomes. And
that's great.
So that
That's
really
great
helps sell it.
insight.
Look, it's more efficient.
Yeah, I really kind of hooked onto this whole talk about goals and conflicting goals. And if you're trying to coach an organization and you see different managers with different goals, it's time to go talk to their manager and be like, hey, this is kind of destroying the system here. It's destroying our output, our throughput of value. And this is what I'm seeing. Like, what do you think about that? Do you see that having these different goals, like not being aligned? Do you, can you imagine how, like, you're seeing what I'm seeing? Because what I see is I got, you know, different teams with number one priorities. They're trying to use constrained resources for their own benefit, local optimizations and all that stuff. I mean, I see it all the time. And it's like, if you can identify those things and bring it to the person who made it so, I mean, I think that's a great start to start dismantling some of that dysfunction.
Well, yeah, David, you hit the nail on the head by talking about goals, because the conflict of goals, and especially the goals that we don't know about, so like a hidden agenda of certain people in the team, is driving the decisions. Like the new VP came, and it is very possible that the new VP was convinced by some other people, or maybe by his previous experience, that things need to be done differently. And there was no other evidence or, you know, strong voice the opposite way.
I just don't think we're going to squeeze a lot more out of that conversation. I mean, I think we've squeezed what we can, is the little insight that I have to give, that Mitya has to give. David, you got us a new nasty question? Something meaty? Oh, you're on mute, bud.
Yeah, this one's from Joel, and I put it in the chat a little while ago. He wanted to explore the adoption versus transformation spectrum. It sounded kind of abrupt from what he heard you say. Was it abrupt? Was it gradual? And yeah.
Oh, okay. So this is kind of easy. So you're flying an airplane and you have no instruments, right? You don't even know, you don't know what the RPM is. You don't know what your airspeed is. You don't know what your angle of attack is. You don't know anything. You just know you got a plane, you got a stick, and that's it, right? And you don't even know what your ground speed, you don't know anything, right? And the question is, well, how do you improve? Well, okay, now you go and you put a bunch of instrumentation on and you ask them, so how much better are you flying the plane now than you were? Like, well, I don't know. I didn't have any instrumentation before. Now, the process of doing that instrumentation is drastic. One day it didn't have all this instrument panel, the next day it did. The process of slowly learning to fly the plane better happens over time. So obviously, in the same way, the analogy is obvious here, which is before we formed the teams, we didn't know any of this stuff. We formed the teams, that structural change of we were not running in a less stack structure, yesterday, and today we are. That change was overnight.
How many?
Not unlike the David Marquette when he talks about the turn the ship around, and the rule changes overnight.
Yeah.
The process of learning and growing through inspection and adaptation and improving things and learning, oh, well, we should be moving farther up the stack, that we should be cross-training more, and all of this stuff happens slowly and organically. But putting the instrumentation panel in place, that happened effectively overnight, right? We trained them, we launched them.
How many teams did you involve in that overnight change?
3.
3.
And then we rolled in 2 more within a few months.
Okay. I thought it was more than that, because this was
no, because there's thousands of people.
Yeah.
But this is effectively, if you did this from less and you were doing a formal less huge or the whole darn thing,
yeah.
This definitely fits in the less huge, right? And you would do it one requirement area at a time, right? That's even in the less rules. So you could argue that this BIOS was the first requirement area,
yeah.
Except it was really a extended component team, and we were only working our way slowly to stretch up to the surface, right? But even if you had done that initially, you would have a single requirement area, and that one requirement area was done instantly. But we even used the hardware generation as one of the dimensions of the component boundary, or of the less product group boundary, if you will, right? A very odd thing that we did. Clever, creative, served its purpose. You might not always have that opportunity.
Yeah.
The opportunity existed because of some really bad code management practices in the past, right? Copy, paste, reuse. But we leveraged that past bad behavior to our benefit as a adoption boundary.
Okay.
Is it good?
Yeah.
David.
What metric? Sorry, I did this burning question. So what metrics? You're talking about the metrics on the airplane, right? So were there any metrics that you set out with that we're going to improve this, and this, doing this, and I'll show you after a few months they'll improve? Was there anything like that, or was it kind of a leap of faith?
Nothing other than the standard scrumminess, right? The are our retrospectives creating actionable things that we take care of in the next sprint? Do we have a well-refined product backlog where we know what we have, right? We did track velocity, but we didn't beat people up with it, right? We certainly were forecasting. Are we going to get down to this MVP line that we need to be at before Intel, in order to take that train ride of the marketing train ride with Intel that Mitya was discussing?
What about,
we were certainly focusing on that, right?
What about like feature cycle time or release cycle time? Any kind of like speed to market? Anything?
Not
like
in that way, no.
Okay. That's okay.
Now,
That's right.
What's interesting, if you talk about the diagnostics, for the diagnostics, we were able to do cost of delay per PBI. So every PBI added a new diagnostic capability. And there were enough analytics. This thing is deployed in the field to a large enough number of customers. And the people that are in the hands-on high-tech customer service, these are like Oh, you have a problem? We will pick up the phone. Oh, you need us on a corporate jet, and we'll fly a technician to you. I mean, you know, whatever you need, we will get you back up, and your trading system or whatever will be up, you know, instantly. This is not. I'm sorry. If you don't like this, please hit 5. You know, would you like us to call you back slowly? This is gold-plated kind of support, right? Which is what you expect when you write a multi-million-dollar check for these kind of products, right? But cost of delay, diagnostics. There were groups that had done the analytics that the diagnostics team was actively working with, and they could say, we get X number of units returned per month because of problems with these memory chips. And we get them back in, and we find out that the problem is a ghost. It's not real. It wasn't truly failed. Or we have so many problems with this network controller, and we get a lot of false positives where we think there's a problem and there isn't a problem. And after the customer has a problem like 2 or 3 times, and remember, they're paying amazing amounts of money for these products, we say, you know what, don't worry about it. We will ship you a whole new thing, right? So we'll ship you several $1 million of brand new equipment because we can't seem to diagnose this thing for you in the field, but we're going to keep you happy, right? And so they could say, ability to diagnose these memory chips and detect this kind of failure is worth this dollar amount per month. Ability to detect this kind of problem in the network card is worth this much money per month for every month that we don't have a way to better diagnose it. This other kind of problem in the network card is worth this amount of money. And we could take the product backlog and we could rank it by what is bleeding the most. And what was crazy is that the amount of money that was bled in 1 month was radically, orders of magnitude more than the cost of the team. And the problem had still not been addressed for years. Now, BIOS is a different story because it was down in the weeds. And as Mitri was saying, to some extent, does it come on? Does the green light come on? If it is, then does it connect? Then it's good. There wasn't a lot of, you guys do 6 months, 9 months of really hard work across a large number of teams, across a large number of people, 40, 50 people. And all we really care about in the end is that it works the same way that it worked in the previous hardware. It still comes on, it still boots, it still connects to everything it's supposed to, and it just has all the new functionality that the old stuff had. Oh, and by the way, we add some new stuff, but the new stuff is small in comparison to, so is that, okay, metric, that was the metric answer.
No, that was good. That was really good. Thank you. Appreciate that. Did anyone have any? Go ahead.
Question from Jeff. I just see in the chat. Did the project eventually get completed, or did the whole product line fail? The project did complete, and the product line still exists. Didn't fail. Although I don't have any information whether they're doing any kind of Scrum or complete waterfall.
We have strong suspicions.
Yeah, wouldn't that software be a book? We should check it out.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions before we wrap up? We can probably do one more if there's another one.
I wanted to ask, if you don't mind, I wanted to ask specifically of what measurements were used to determine success and progress as well. And of course, many times people who heard about Scrum and Agile, they talk about velocity. And we know how dangerous is that to measure velocity as a progress. So, and this is my problem as well. I really would like to shift from velocity to something else. And I'm hearing here monetary values like dollars. That's great. That's as a value. So what else in your practice, in your adoption of LeSS and Scrum, you used to justify the new approach, to actually show the value of a new approach and understanding the success is achieved or good progress towards success.
Mitya, can you go after this one? I mean, it just felt better. We had more visibility. We had less problems. We didn't have big bug lists. But you may have. Can you give something more concrete here? So the question is, what metrics did we have? How did we know that things were getting better?
Yeah, and to me, there are two parts that are important to measure. One is the product better, product delivery better, maybe three: product better, product delivery better, and is people experience better. So we don't have people here, other people from the team to speak for that, but at least James, correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think I think that people's experience was better, measurably. 100%, not 100%. There's probably, I mean, there's a good, I don't know, maybe 20% at least of the team, 15, 20% that did not have great experience with Scrum. But others had a much better experience. Others who have maybe were not able to develop themselves as even though they were leaders. And I'm thinking of one example specifically. This person was a leader in her technical field, but she was not able to kind of be seen by everybody as a leader. And it was immediately clear that she just kind of organically became, the team that she was part of elected her to be the kind of the team lead of the Scrum team, and she had an amazing role in making a lot of things work better. So that part is measurable, I believe, and while not in 100% better, but it is better in many people. The delivery, so we did launch the product with Intel, and did not delay due to any BIOS issues or BIOS MVP or feature lacking. So that is measurably succeeded.
It would have showed up in the next generation. It would have shown up big time.
Yeah.
The next hardware generation, we would have taken a new chipset and, everything would be in the pluggable layer. We would run a bunch of tests. We wouldn't have as much tests as we needed, and we'd have to focus on getting more of them. There'd still be things that we ironed out. But I bet a new chipset, that same team, those same teams, had they been left alone and we not done massive layoffs and all of this, I bet they could have handled the new generation of chipset in, I don't know, half the time? Mitya, you can tell me.
For sure, half the time, maybe even a little bit better.
And the one after that would have been even faster. Had we kept going the direction we were going, this ability to take a new chipset and we're done with that. What's next? Would have got there.
We don't have the data because, so I also left the company. I left the company, I think 4 months after that particular product was launched. And that's almost not enough time in that business to know the bugs. You have to really do 6-8 months to see the large deployments, to see bugs and to see defects from the field, and to see how you did in terms of finding defects without having bug reports, finding defects and fixing defects. And one thing I think James mentioned that in automation we could have done better in automation. We tried to do a lot of things in automation, but that firmware BIOS is very difficult to automate. Not all the firmware is difficult to automate. Some is very automatable, but particularly x86, the compute BIOS is hard. And so it would be interesting to know if we missed anything because we're not shipping the code complete product to QA so that they find bugs. Instead, we kind of layer the features and test as we go, and automate as much as possible. But so unfortunately, we don't have the data to say how we did from quality point of view, but I haven't heard anything terrible.
Qualitatively, we know it was better.
Yeah.
Is that fair?
Yeah.
So Vlad, just got a quick follow up here. So was there anything other than bugs and velocity used as a measurement?
Routinely every sprint.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't track bugs. We just squashed them. First off, I mean, where there were bugs that would show up, they were like, "Oh crap, we found a bug, we didn't know it," and we'll deal with it in the next sprint. But more or less, we stopped. We didn't track massive bug list. We didn't make bugs. As soon as we had an engineer would fix, do some dev, the tester would immediately hit it. Oftentimes they were swapping roles to some extent, right? Certainly the engineers were being cross-trained by the testers, and the testers were somewhat being cross-trained by the engineers. By the software engineers, and also it's been a long time. But no, we did not come in here and do let's generate all our KPIs. We said, let's get transparency. Let's get, let's know where we're going. Let's get visibility into what's going on with a single consolidated product backlog. Let's have retrospectives that work and start to improve things from those retrospectives. And let's make sure that, sadly, let's not crank our quality standard, our definition of done. Let's not crank it to maximum so fast that it forces us to miss that Intel release. So although we would love to have had test-driven development at the BIOS level for everything, the truth is that it took a tremendous amount of work just to figure out how to do test first development, which we did have a guy who was working on that, and we did figure out how to do it. We had a kind of prototype working, and that was kind of towards the end of the effort. But most of the effort was in that higher level automation. But we were working down the stack. We were working down the test pyramid. We were going after the problem slowly. But if we had stopped and said, we're not going to release this until it's all perfect, and by the way, we're going to take years and years and years of changes that have been copy pasted from one branch to the next, to the next, to the next, and we're going to migrate all of that into the pluggable layer, and we're going to do it with perfect unit testing as we do it, and all sorts of other, we're going to run static code analysis on the code and get those static code analysis perfect and everything. If we had done it as well as one would hope, we would have missed the Intel date. So what we had to do is, let's make it as good as we can afford to make it. Let's stop doing the copy paste. Let's start using the pluggable layer. Let's bring QA into the team. Let's start automating as much as we can, because the formal release management is sluggish and problematic and outside of our control. We put our own CI tooling so that anytime we checked in, it ran the build and it ran the tests that we had available. And we brought that into the scope of what the teams could do for themselves instead of relying on external parties to do. So we did as much improvement as we could while not going as far as I would like it to go. And that was a call that Mitya, as sort of a fake product owner, fake because he wasn't really in product management, because it wasn't a true requirement area. It was really a component owner, right? Had to make that delicate judgment there, right? Less than ideal, but we were rapidly getting better. And I really think that had time gone on, we could have improved that automation even more, improved the engineering practices even more, cross-training more. We would have gone up through all the layers more and had less problems of external dependencies because the team was doing all that work themselves. And we would have eventually had spare capacity and said, let's start chewing into other functionality that has nothing to do with BIOS, right? And then of course that software VP would have been even more challenged to politically defend what was going on, right? The fact that the hardware group is doing all kinds of amazing stuff in a very difficult environment, and the quality that's being produced and the forecast accuracy of what's being produced up in the software middleware stuff is in no way at the same level as what these guys down in the deep dark esoteric component are starting to achieve, right? I want to be sensitive to Mitya's time. Mitya, it sounds like you're starting to get pulled.
Well, we're at about 2 hours and 40 minutes here.
Yeah, we're pretty far in.
But so is that okay if we call it here, guys and gals? It's just guys. That was a great meetup. Really appreciate James and Mitya joining us today.